Welcome to the Metro Munk Podcast, your sanctuary for self-discovery, personal growth, and emotional healing. I'm your host, Parag Lokande, a shadow coach, spiritual mentor, seeker, poet, and a student of life. This podcast is a heartfelt journey into understanding and embracing your true self. It is designed to help you navigate the complexities of the human experience with wisdom and compassion. Join me on a journey to self-discovery and personal growth as we explore the power of self-healing. Hey everyone, welcome back to episode 33 of the Metro Munk Podcast. Today, we're continuing our conversation about milestones and stages of growth. As you know, in the last episode, we had sort of a quick overview of the 4 stages of growth. So I thought starting today, we'll take a closer look at each of these stages in detail. But before we dive in, I wanted to share something important because these stages can seem very linear. And you might look at these as levels of a building. So you would then naturally expect to rise up as you go through each level. But that is not the case. So I wanted to share something important about these stages, because these stages initially, like I said, they're not like these levels in a building where you can only be in one place at one time. It's not like you're moving up in a straight line. You see, growth doesn't work that way. Instead, think of these stages like a maypole with colorful ribbons. And each ribbon as though represents a different part of you, a social aspect of you, a personal growth aspect of you, an aspect of you that enters relationships, work, parenting, for example. Each of these aspects of you are as though these ribbons on a maypole. And these parts of you might grow at different rates. They may even be on different levels. They won't necessarily be all in one line per se. So for instance, you could be a mindful, conscious parent, for example, but then you could be struggling with relationships in your life. Or you might excel at work, but then you might feel stuck in your personal life. So as you work on your emotional growth and heal your old patterns, imagine each of these ribbons gradually rising up bit by bit to reach higher levels. And then over time, these different stages of growth, they actually start to feel more or less like those levels of the building. What I'm trying to say is, over time, your average state of being feels like a level of the building. But initially, it's not the case. So this means eventually you will notice yourself spending more and more time at these higher states. You'd be a lot more balanced. There'll be a lot less things triggering you. You may not have much resistance left. You would be probably growing more non-dual about things, meaning you're not the left wing or the right wing. You can see the wisdom in everything. But then that's just eventually. To begin with, that's not the case. So let's explore how that happens one stage at a time, shall we? So I just wanted to, sort of clarify that before we start to dive in. And let this be then at the back of your mind as we go through this journey. Okay, then let's start with the first stage, which is life is happening to me. Okay, so how do we get here? I suppose we're just dropped here when we are born, um, most likely. But what exactly determines our worldview for us to go, life's happening to me? Um, and the answer is how we see ourselves. The answer is in the self view, because how we see life is directly, or rather inversely proportional to how we see ourselves. So our self view dictates our worldview. So if you see, or if certain aspects of you are stuck in this victim state, because you're in this constant state of blaming life, that it's here to get me, life's happening to me, then the answer lies in your self view. After all, how you see yourself is really a projection onto the world. So for example, when we have a lot of fear, shame, and guilt in the body, we often start to see ourselves as unworthy, flawed, or even unlovable. So our self-view is unworthy, flawed, unlovable. This self-view, in fact, is such a opposite end of the spectrum to who we truly are. How to our, the essence of who we are, our higher self, let's say, which is really worthy, flawless, unconditionally loved by the universe. So then to see ourselves as unworthy, flawed, or even unlovable, is literally like you've dropped from the heaven. And it's to exist in sort of the darkest places that you could ever exist. So it is being in the depths of the shadow within us. And this is a place you can say no one wants to know, let alone feel. So it's natural then not wanting to face it, because it's the depths of the shadow. It's natural for us to not wanting to acknowledge it, because doing so is only going to remind you of how far away you are from your true nature. And hence such individuals project that pain onto others, because it's too painful for them to own, acknowledge, let alone feel and heal. This way it's less hurtful for these individuals. This stage, as I've referred to before, is also called the victim state. The word victim comes from the Latin word victima, which means animal offered in sacrifice to the gods. And I think deep down, these individuals feel that way, that the universe has wronged them, the world has punished them. So they constantly are in this state of blaming the world for the pain that they are feeling. You see, imagine yourself trying to be in this state constantly. It's bound to build resentment or anger if you are in this constant state of being threatened. Now, we in the New Age spirituality call these individuals narcissists. But I have a very different view, and not in any way to disregard the effects of being around a narcissist. But what I'm trying to also show you is a different aspect of these individuals. So if you're constantly in this victim state, you're naturally going to build resentment. You're naturally going to feel anger. And this anger, depending upon your predisposition, can be either directed outwards or can be either directed inwards. Now, so if you're the strong types, you'll make sure that you won't allow the world to do that to you. And you will use that anger to either bully or fight with the world. If you're not the strong types, if that's not your predisposition, you will crawl under a rock and hide. And the ones who crawl under a rock and hide starts manipulating themselves, whereas the ones who are externalizing the anger, who are bullying or fighting with the world, starts manipulating others. You see, it's challenging to make someone with this mindset to grow, to heal, to turn inwards, because this state is characterized by the least amount of self-awareness that there can be. On one hand, they feel powerless to change their circumstances. In fact, they don't even have the slightest belief that the answers rests with them. They believe the answers will come from the world, because the world has wronged them. They often adopt a passive approach, and they're waiting for others to solve their problems or provide solutions. And that's where the victim aspect comes in. But alternatively, when they use their anger, to project onto the world, makes them a bully, or display pervasive patterns of grandiosity, or a constant need of admiration, or even they lack empathy many times. So this is just a face that they build to protect themselves. Even if we have a high degree of self-awareness, and I think this is very important, because some of you might go, and there's a very high chance if you're attracted to this podcast, if this resonates with you deeply, it's very less likely that you would be in a victim state. You would probably be in the next state, which we'll talk about later. But so I'm assuming, my listeners have a high degree of self-awareness. But what I also wanted to share is, even if we have high degree of self-awareness and may not identify ourselves to be at this level. So what I'm trying to say is, you might not identify yourself to be Donald Trump, but we may still have parts of us that are in a victim state. And this is what I meant by the maypole analogy. You see, just because most of the areas of your life you have self-awareness, and you are the believer of personal development, and you're working towards healing yourself, does not mean that there would be a particular part of you that is stuck in the victim state. So clearly, if all of your parts or most of your parts are stuck in victim state, then that would be your average state of being. But it's also important to be aware that can creep into anyone at any level of self-awareness. And that's the goal, to identify where we are playing victims in our lives. So in most cases, life is the best incubator for someone caged in a victim state. Now, this could be a part of you that's stuck in the victim state, or this could be a person who is mostly existing in a victim state. I believe life is the best incubator for someone who is in a victim state, because what it sort of does is very intelligently, it will constantly, in this incubator, like a washing machine, spin you through various repeating patterns. You'll be constantly repeating the same type of relationships until you literally get fed up, or something arises within you saying, I think I'm missing something. This is just too obvious now for me to see. So in most cases, what I like to say is, life is the best incubator of life. Often when individuals reach a place of a total burnout, or an existential crisis of some level, or they literally get to a point where they realize, I cannot go on like this anymore. That is sort of when they fall out of this incubator, or they sort of have this felt need to leave the victim state and take responsibility. So life is the best incubator for someone caged in a victim state, and it brings them, like I said, to a point where they finally allow themselves then to take responsibility. So you see, when they face enough adversities and repeatedly find themselves in same patterns, they get so fed up that they realize something is missing. I think it is here, I believe, they start seeking help, and then they open themselves to change. So I know the New Age philosophy calls such individuals narcissists, and if you're in that camp, then it's important to know that narcissism is a spectrum. We all have narcissistic tendencies, including children. So this is not a disease, or this is not a disability, or some form of psychosis. Indeed, some individuals are leaning towards the other end of the spectrum, and naturally, this gets very difficult then to be around such individuals. But I just want to sort of dispel certain myths around this word narcissist, because it's become a very loosely used word, and we're sort of using this to perhaps even belittle or blame or punish some people in our life. So anyways, so the more of the above repressed emotions in someone, which is, as we spoke about, fear, shame, guilt, you see, the heavier is the burden of life for them, because such individuals feel caged and weighed down on a deep unconscious level, and they're and the more they put together this confident or powerful projection of themselves, the more safer can they feel, or the more protected can this caged, weighed down, fearful, shameful, or guilty part of them can feel. But this persona is only skin deep. You see, that's the thing. And it can be easily threatened, which is why these individuals are constantly trying to be on the front foot. And they sort of have this notion that if I manipulate everyone, or if I manipulate my surrounding, manipulate the world, if I bully the world, then I'm projecting a power play. I'm showing I'm more powerful, and thereby no one's going to wrong me. You see, this is why most individuals in this stage have developed ways to manipulate, control, or bully others, so then they don't feel threatened. And at the most likely, way to alleviate this burden becomes sort of finding coping mechanisms, to either numb through food or addiction, or even projecting their own negative traits or desires or behaviors onto others, because then that helps them perceive others as the source of their problems. So it's important to note that life is happening to me is more a affective state. It's an unconscious feeling state. We don't walk around our life consciously thinking life's happening to me. It's just the way we portray to others, or it's just the way how we feel unconsciously deep down. So it's a feeling state. It's not about labeling a person or judging a person as a victim or a narcissist. So this is not about saying, "Hey, you are on that level of the pyramid." So this is just how you feel deep down unconsciously. So it is instead recognizing that someone who finds themselves in the victim state are unconsciously on an autopilot to portray this behavior, and this is why it is a blind spot for them. The good news is that working with these emotions, fear, guilt, shame, springboards an individual quickly out of this state. That is, of course, once they've fallen out of the incubator of life. That is, of course, when they've reached that point of existential crisis, or there's a level of self-awareness that's now growing within them. It is then when they start embracing these emotions, feeling them, releasing them, which then quickly propels them out of this victim state. So it's my personal experience that every time I have shifted shame or guilt, the effects have been profound. And these changes can occur in a matter of few sessions. See, the longest distance a victim will travel is literally from their head to their heart. The other thing I wanted to talk about is each stages of growth is a spectrum as well. And this spectrum, you can say, is a spectrum of duality. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Let's try and understand this by way of some examples. Take the example of narcissists. Someone, we normally view as manipulative, controlling towards others, and you could place them on one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum, you might put empaths. Empaths are the people who are very sensitive. They feel everything that's going on in their environment. They are constantly affected by everyone's feeling. So these individuals then have learned to manipulate themselves so that they can be safe in the environment. They don't get triggered by somebody else's feelings, for example. So empath then, just like a narcissist who manipulates others, empath manipulates their own perception, not others, but themselves, through acts of self-betrayal, and it's all in the effort to be liked or accepted. From a societal perspective, however, we might see empaths as more favorable than narcissists because their actions appear less destructive to others. However, at their core, these are two expressions of the same thing. It's no surprise then, empaths will often attract narcissists in their lives. They're two sides of the same coin, and that is what I mean by duality. Okay, let's take another example. Consider pessimists versus optimists. Again, society prefers the optimists because they bring positivity to the table. But then the pessimists we often avoid. Once again, both of them reflects the same emotional root: shame, guilt, fear. Somebody who is shameful or guilty or fearful will constantly choose to be an optimist because that is where they are accepted more in the society or liked more in the society. People compliment them more compared to the optimist. Therefore, that then helps them to not feel their shame, guilt, or fear. Fear of standing up, fear of being wrong, fear of going against the conformity. So depending on whether these emotions are internalized or externalized, we might position ourselves as an optimist or a pessimist. Or think about individuals who constantly shrink themselves, who prefer to hide from the world. You would put them on the opposite side, to those who draw energy from the crowd. These are the party animals, They always want to be visible. Again, both behaviors stem from the same emotional seed, shame. But it's just manifested in two contrasting ways. So the important takeaway here is, just because society rewards or accepts certain traits doesn't mean they're free from negative emotions. So just because you are an optimist, don't go thinking you are sorted. Unless you look under the hood, you will be surprised. So the same emotion can drive either attraction towards something or aversion from something, influencing how we then see the world and our place in it. And now here is the $1 million concept. From a healing perspective, this is really super important to land. So I'm really hoping to do justice. From a healing perspective, the measure of growth, the measure of whether you have healed from something, isn't about just simply moving on the spectrum from one end to the other. It is not about choosing one side of the spectrum from the other. It's not like suddenly let's say you are a pessimist and now you're doing a lot of healing, feeling your feelings and all that sort of stuff. Suddenly you become an optimist. And then you have such an attachment to being an optimist that you start criticizing pessimists or belittling pessimists, or you just want to change everybody to become optimists. What you're really doing is you're just moving along the spectrum. And you're literally on this, that's not healing. True healing happens when we rise above the spectrum entirely. You should have no resistance, no judgments, no attachments, total neutrality towards either being a pessimist sometimes, either being an optimist sometimes, or even being a realist sometimes. If there is no specific attachment, if, not right wing or not left wing, not Democrat or no Republican, that sort of stuff. True healing happens when you rise above the spectrum entirely. When we are no longer fixated on a particular point of view, we can see both sides as valid and relevant. Then objectivity comes in instead of attachment. This is how you move towards attributes like equanimity or oneness or serenity. So the real measure of healing is not if you've moved on the spectrum from one point to the other. The real measure of healing is, have you risen above the spectrum completely? Have you risen above the duality completely? Meaning, are you still attached to one view versus the other? So another example, somebody who was an empath, who's now healed himself to be or herself to be an empath, might suddenly feel powerful or assertive enough to now start blaming the narcissist. So then they start driving campaigns, they start creating video content, they start really, they literally go to war against all the narcissists in the world. That is not healing. You've just simply moved from one end of the spectrum to the other, and now you're most likely going to become a narcissist in the effort of trying to change the world. So you'll be constantly trying to manipulate everyone's perceptions towards narcissist. You're constantly trying to wake up all empaths. You're trying to probably push down information so that they can wake up. So that's the pitfall on healing, and you got to be always careful. Just because you've moved from one point to another doesn't mean that's healing, right? So you've got to keep looking for these emotions until you fully feel like you've risen above them. Meaning, narcissists look alike the empaths. You don't see them any different. Yes, maybe the way they operate would be different, but essentially you just see them as one and the same. So I hope I've landed that, because that's a very important concept. And it's also a very big measure whether you are rising these levels, these stages of growth, because that's literally when you start moving up this, that building, or start going through these different stages. Otherwise, you're simply on the same stage, just on the other side of the spectrum. Okay, I can try and give you another example just to make sure we have sealed this. Let's say someone who has risen above duality. What will they look like? What will they think like, talk like? Such individuals will no longer identify rigidly as left-wing or right-wing. There is no fixation. They can appreciate both perspectives, because they understand Each of their viewpoint stems from the same human emotions, just that they're expressed in different ways. Now, this can be challenging to grasp, but when we've truly transcended something, we agree with both sides. Not because we lack conviction, but because we see their interconnectedness. We see what's at the root of both these polarities. So every stage of growth comes with its own set of emotions and polarities. And the only way to rise above them is to fully feel the emotions that keep us tethered to that spectrum. In future episodes, of course, we'll dive deeper into the concept of duality, but I just wanted to sort of open this conversation today, but then also make a point that true healing, the measure of true healing, is actually rising above duality. It's just a foundational idea at this stage, so that we can understand what true healing looks like. For now, I'll leave you with this question: where do you believe you might be stuck on the spectrum in your life? What point of view are you fixated on? So when you encounter a perspective that opposes your own, how does that make you feel? Are you defensive? Are you curious? Are you resistant? Do you get passionate and defend? Or what would it look like to release that judgment of both sides and view them as two parts of the same whole? Something to think about. So folks, thank you for joining me today as we've explored the first stage of growth, life's happening to me. Just to recap, we've touched on impacts of shame, guilt, and fear on our self-view and how these emotions anchor us to the victim state. How the concept of duality also plays a key role in understanding personal growth and how it's on the spectrum. Remember, true growth isn't about choosing one side over the other. It's about transcending the spectrum entirely and then finding freedom from the emotional cycles that keep us stuck. I'm not saying we will not feel the spectrum of emotions once you're healed. What I'm trying to say is it won't bind you anymore. It won't hold you down anymore. You won't be afraid of it anymore. In fact, you would transcend the perception completely towards these negative emotions. In the next episode, we'll continue our journey by diving into the next stages of growth, of course, and uncovering more insights about how we move towards this place of balance and healing. Until then, folks, take care. And remember, every step you take on this journey, no matter how small, is a significant step. Much love and take care, and see you in the next episode.